Hello, it's your host of the Knowledge Sacks podcast, Paula Martinez Benj. I just walked a mile from the bus stop in 6-degree weather. But here we go, right into it. Welcome to the Knowledge Sacks podcast, a podcast built on listener submissions, current events, and politics, mostly about Puerto Rico, sprinkled with insightful historical context for curious leftist comrades. We're learning and we want to learn with you. We're planting seeds because we believe we only reap what we sow. So let's sow knowledge, positivity, and accountability and watch our garden grow together. To submit stories, provide historical context, elaborate on a subject, or make corrections to a previously reported story, shoot us an email at knowledgesacks01@gmail.com. You can find our weekly podcast on SoundCloud, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, Libsyn, and YouTube. All relevant links can be found wherever the description box may be located on whatever platform this podcast has been found. Alright, so today's topic at hand, originally I was going to record an episode about whitefish, but let me explain some of my issues I've been having this week. And this podcast isn't about me just venting about my life, but I do want you guys to know what's going on in my life, so you guys have an idea of who is, I'm human. I'm a human at the other end of this microphone. It's not just some person, some knowledge, right? This is knowledge that I have acquired through research and work, and knowledge is accessible to anyone as long as you have the mental capacity to retain the information. Anyone can look any of this information up for themselves, and I implore you to do so. It's all a matter of experience and perspective that allows you to see the larger global theater that is currently happening in this country and in the world right now. And I will explain further. Every episode of the Knowledge Sacks podcast, I want to clarify the current events and how we have come to this point as a species. Right, this nationalistic thinking is very poisonous because it takes us away from one another. With all of this being said, I originally was going to do this episode about whitefish, but I got very overwhelmed by the amount of information that I had that I actually started recording an episode 37 minutes into recording the episode. It was so disorganized and all over the place that I just scrapped it because it was just too much information all at once in a very haphazard way. And I want these episodes to be incredibly focused because we can only cover one topic at a time. The whole point of this podcast is to inform people, to educate people about Puerto Rico specifically, and how Puerto Rico is a microcosm of everything horrible, horrific, bad, whatever adjectives you want to use to describe the situation that we have in the United States, preventable, ironic, whatever adjectives you want to use to describe the conditions that we all are subjected and forced to live in. It's my homeland. My family, it's where my family lives, it's where they're from, it's where my ancestors are buried. I mean, that is my people. Those are mi gente, mis raíces, everything. Everything's in Puerto Rico. I'm a human being. I'm not sure, I know for a fact, in the least, I can release one podcast a week, and I'm going to aim for Wednesdays. But if the podcast isn't released on Wednesday, just know that it's going to be late. And I have reasons. This right here, this podcast is my labor of love, because I don't know how else I can help my community except by sending money back home to the island, and the only way I can do that is by working. And I do not have the time or connections to a lawyer to legitimize a nonprofit at the moment, but my goal is to make Knowledge Sex into a nonprofit that involves hurricane aid relief, direct action. So like sending canned goods to Puerto Rico and preparing people's homes, sending solar panels. That's my end game, my end goal. So with all of this being said, last episode, we started talking about trauma. We started talking about how mental illnesses like PTSD and ASD manifest in people, and how the trauma of not being neglected, of not having access to clean water, to having access to contaminated water, not having control or autonomy over the aid. All of these things are happening right now in Puerto Rico currently. There are multiple news stories that have come out at the end of December and the beginning of this month in January of 1.5 million Puerto Ricans still being without power, electricity. And that's why I started looking into whitefish energy. But this episode isn't going to be about whitefish energy. I promise you, I am still working on that episode, and I have Monday and Tuesday off of next week. And Monday, I'm going to spend all day organizing and really getting down. It's going to be a series of episodes about Unidos por Puerto Rico and whitefish energy. That's going to be Monday is research, Tuesday is recording, and I'm going to have a bunch of episodes. So it's recording and editing on Tuesday, and then Wednesday I go back on my regular job, my daily grind. This episode is going to be about clean water, and there's a water crisis globally. Yesterday, I started doing research because, like I said, this is going to be a tag-along episode to last episode, which is about trauma. I really suggest you listen to it. And there's a section in the episode where I talk about how, according to the VA website, the government website, trauma can worsen or intensify, or the likelihood of developing a mental illness in direct relations to trauma caused by climate change, basically, by these storms, by these intensified storms. And you drink from contaminated water, or you don't have access to food, that it can increase the likelihood of you developing increase the likelihood of developing mental illness, right? So not only in Puerto Rico is there no power, people don't have access to clean water still, all right? It's April 2014. People still in Flint, Michigan don't have access to clean water. It is now January 2018. Do not sit here and tell me that you believe and trust the U.S. government. And the whole point of FEMA being in Puerto Rico, like I said last episode, was to prevent people from getting aid. Because there is still a bunch of aid, there is still a bunch of water, and none of it was properly distributed. Why? Because FEMA's not there to help people. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which will be mentioned later on in this episode, the same people who did all kinds of sketchy stuff at Standing Rock, okay? The same entity. They're doing the same stuff in Puerto Rico. Okay? This country is racist, and it's committing mass genocide on the island. The elites are committing mass genocide on the island of Puerto Rico right now. They're killing our culture. They're killing our people. 1,065 people. Anywhere between 985 and 1,065 people have been killed in Puerto Rico by Hurricane Maria. You can listen to my last episode where I explain those numbers. It was from a investigative journalist group in Puerto Rico. I believe it's the CPI is the abbreviation. And you can check out my last episode, or you can Google it and look it up yourself. I encourage everyone to fact check me. I am not the queen of all the facts. There's a lot of odd, sketchy things, and the more I look into it, and the deeper I delve into the facts, the deeper I look into each individual, each of these elites who are involved, the more I am reassured that this podcast in itself is essential. And not only that, I also affirm how ignorant people have become and how ignorant they have allowed themselves to become in this country. But that's enough of me ranting. So this article came out in Vox News October 26. 5 weeks after Hurricane Maria tore through Puerto Rico, the island appears to be in the midst of a growing environmental catastrophe. 1 in 4 Puerto Ricans still lack access to reliable, clean water. Some people whose water service hadn't been restored were last week reportedly dragging bottles and barrels through holes and chain link fences to siphon water from wells that may be infused with toxic waste from a nearby Superfund site. I just Googled Superfund sites. This is what it will automatically tell you. It's from Wikipedia, so. A Superfund site is any land in the United States that has been contaminated by hazardous waste and identified by the EPA as a candidate for cleanup because it poses a risk to human health and or the environment. These sites are placed on the national priorities list. This is the Fox article again. There have also been reports of water-contaminated raw sewage because, if you guys don't know, Rosa Clemente, when she first got to the island, basically right after the hurricanes hit and there was still no power and all of these horrible things that are still ongoing today, it smelled like raw sewage. And you still get descriptions of it smells like raw sewage on the island, or there's smog because there's so many generators going, or, all the other horrendous things that are happening right now on La Isla and are affecting children and are affecting the elderly, the most vulnerable people. So, anyway, there have also been reports of water-contaminated raw sewage and at least 74 suspected cases and 2 deaths from leptospirosis, a deadly animal-borne disease that can also live in water. It's rat urine. They found rat urine in water. Healthcare workers on the ground are increasingly concerned about additional outbreaks of waterborne illnesses. Landfills are at capacity, according to CNN. And as Vox's Alexa Fernandez Campbell reported, the water situation on Puerto Rico may be worse than the government is letting on, with pumping stations powered by intermittent generators and limited fuels for people to boil water. The environmental health, waste, and pollution crises are not simply a result of the storm. Hurricane Maria made everything worse because there's a financial and energy crisis on the island. People don't talk about this, but there have been rolling brownouts in Puerto Rico for a long time. The Vox article continues. After Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria, millions of Americans found out the hard way how close they are to toxic waste and how easily they can be exposed as harmful chemicals that leach into floodwaters and wash through homes. But for a dense, poor, and remote place like Puerto Rico, the hazards are all more severe. I'm going to skip through parts of this article and only read the relevant parts. I will keep the article, you can read these articles on your own. I will provide the links to them. Trust and believe. Like I said, I'm not trying to hide any information from you. I want you guys to look into this yourself, and I highly encourage that you do. I don't want you to only depend on me to get your news. But if you need to listen to me to uplift your spirits and to keep up the fight, then good. Vamos. Peleamos juntos. Batallamos juntos. Somos unidos. Okay, baby? We are going to do this together. No podemos hacer esto solo. No podemos depender en los gringos. Que esto es importante para que la única manera que el mundo va a cambiar es si unimos juntos y batallamos juntos. Porque nada cambia si quedas ahí sentado y no dices nada. Si tú ves la injusticia y tú dices nada, you're a part of the injustice, okay? La gente que no dice nada, they're just as bad as the people who don't say anything out at all, right? The people who do nothing are just as bad as the people committing the crimes. So anyway, at the same time, Scott Pruitt, who leads the EPA, is firmly entrenched on the side of industry, and some of his deputies now want to roll back the agency's rules on hazardous chemicals. To be frank, and this is a quote, "It's really hard to be certain what the new administration is doing," said Catherine Probst, an independent consultant on hazardous waste who worked at EPA under the Reagan administration. For Puerto Rico, which is facing acute toxic waste concerns due to damaged infrastructure, this uncertainty may hamper immediate cleanup efforts and undermine long-term environmental remediation work on the island needed to protect people's health. EPA has a major disaster relief role in Puerto Rico. We don't typically think of the EPA as an emergency responder, but the agency takes charge during oil spills, chemical leaks, and large-scale disasters, while also providing backup to first responders on the ground. Outside of the extreme events, the agency administers the cleanup of some of the most polluted sites in the country under the Superfund program. This is a federal initiative to pay for the remediation of highly contaminated sites in the United States, established as part of the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act of 1980. The law allows EPA to go after polluters to clean up their waste, and in cases where the responsible party can't be found or is insolvent, it authorizes a quote-unquote super fund to pay for hazardous waste control. EPA currently counts 1,342 sites on its national priorities list for the Superfund, each one posing a unique challenge and risk. The EPA has a site where you can find the ones near you. There are 18 Superfund sites in Puerto Rico, including the Dorado groundwater contamination site in the north-central part of the island, where some people were getting their water. So you remember when I told you last episode that people who drink contaminated water, who lack aid in a responsible, immediate emergency response, who lack autonomy, who lack power and control over their own lives. You remember when I was telling you that they're more inclined to develop mental health issues? Puerto Rico, honey, we're already there. Vox continues. The site is part of a drinking water system that serves 67,000 people. Officials detected carcinogens, tetrachloroethylene, and trichloroethylene. I believe I said, I'm not sure if I said those correctly, but they are carcinogens. They can cause cancer. That our people, they drank this. Officials detected carcinogens in the 1980s, so they detected these the carcinogens I just named in the 1980s, and in 2016, it was added to EPA's Federal Superfund list of the most contaminated sites in the United States. So, of course, the most contaminated sites in the United States affect brown people. Duh, black and brown people. Because this would never happen in an area where it's predominantly white people. Never. Not to this extent. The most contaminated? I don't know. There's more and more poor white people every day. So I know. I mean, we're about to find out, right? Let's see how long it takes white people to wake up. As the Dorado site illustrates, many people in Puerto Rico's dense cities live close to hazardous waste, and power outages and containment damage after storms like Maria increase the likelihood of people becoming exposed. And Puerto Rico faces some unique challenges when it comes to toxic hazards. Much of the waste in Puerto Rico comes from its once booming pharmaceutical industry. And there's a town that was literally known as like Boner Central, Barceloneta, where Viagra was basically, like, majority of Viagra came out of Barceloneta, Puerto Rico. So there's that little factoid. So, Judith Enek, who until January led the EPA's Region 2, who includes Puerto Rico. They are all quite serious, she said. The conditions on Vieques. So, Vieques is a little tiny island off the coast of Puerto Rico that used to be where the Marines would just bomb the crap and test all kinds of weapons and bombs on the island. Like, they took over the island, and that's what they did. Until Puerto Ricans fought back and took the island back. Their freaking island. Alright? You guys have to remember that a lot of Puerto Ricans didn't want, like, Pedro Piso Campos is rolling in his grave right now over the lack of the people who are asleep. Like, he is rolling in his grave right now, watching the diaspora. What are we... Diaspora, wake up! Bing, 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 wake up! Hello! The Americans, the American dream, it's never been real. George Carlin was right. That white dude, he knew what he was talking about. Bing, ding, 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 ding. It's a lie. You know what? It's a freaking lie. The American dream is dead. It's gone. Late stage capitalism is here, baby, and I'm gonna explain all of this to you. Just keep listening. Have faith in me, because I'm gonna explain this crap to you, okay? You just have to listen, and you have to have patience, and give me your time. I'm giving you time to explain this stuff to you for free, so you best give me your time, your listening ears, and if something makes you upset, then give me the facts, give me the articles, and send them to knowledgesacks01@gmail.com, and I'll give you the time of day. But let me tell you, if I think you're wrong, I'm going to give you and snap back, clap back, and give you a bunch of articles back right at you. Don't you think for a second I'm going to let you get away with some fake information or some up news source. Let me tell you, I'm going to tell you like it is. I'm going to tell you how I see things. All right? And if you don't like my explanation, then this podcast isn't for you, baby. You know how much content is being produced? You know how much propaganda is out there? Honey, go find somewhere else. There's plenty of places for you. So going back, another tangent. Going back to Vieques. The conditions on Vieques, an island off the coast of Puerto Rico that is home to 9,000 people, are particularly concerning. Before the storm, it was used as a Navy. Sorry, I said Marines. Pardon me. See, I make mistakes too. It was used as a Navy bombing range for 60 years and was littered with unexploded ordnance. Then came Maria. The major question is how many of these munitions wash into the sea? Enek said. Puerto Rico was also facing a landfill crisis before Maria, with 19 of the 29 landfill sites on the island in violation of federal law piling up with garbage and bathing nearby communities in a putrid stench. The landfill situation has only become worse as Puerto Ricans look to throw away damaged and waterlogged debris. All the while, Puerto Rico's island geography means that waste management equipment has to be shipped in, increasing cleanup costs compared to the sites on the mainland and feeding into a bottleneck of relief supplies. I mean, the article continues, and I'm planning on finishing it, but I want to start talking a little bit about our friend, our enemy, Scott Pruitt. So give me a second here, because I'm going to look up this article. Scott Pruitt. So in Puerto Rico, on top of the landfills being overfilled, on top of floodwaters still going into the oceans, on top of beaches being closed in Puerto Rico, because of agua negra, because of dark, poisonous, disgusting water. The fact that Puerto Ricans are being forced to drink water because the U.S. government is a racist, has always been a controlling colonial power worldwide. On top of all this, we've had a coal ash dumping problem on the island. And not only that, but why is it that our electrical grid uses petroleum? We're one of the last places in the world to do this, and it's one of the most expensive ways to power our island when we live on an island near the equator where we have sunlight, where we could have solar panels. Why do we still have the Jones Act? That is the fault of the U.S. government. Our lack of independence is because of the U.S. government. Our situation in Puerto Rico, the corruption, is because of the U.S. government. Because the U.S. government has been corrupt for decades. The elites don't give a crap about us. And you guys need to stop thinking in the duopoly. Because it's not a duopoly. Right? Democrats are basically libertarians. Most of them are fiscal conservatives who believe in social liberties. That's libertarianism. Obviously, it doesn't work, does it? We have indoctrinated people to the point with religion and public school education. Neoliberalism is cancer. This is why it's a cancer. What is our public school system doing? It's falling apart. It's not being funded properly, and the crap that we allow these weird, crazy, white Christian men in Texas to create textbooks that completely erase Native American people. We all live on stolen land. Don't you forget that for a second. The Spaniards killed the Taino Indians in Puerto Rico, and they're still Taino Indians. I'm not trying to erase you guys. I know you guys are still there. And I hate when people are like, oh, Tainos are not, no, Tainos are still around, dude. Just like Native Americans are still around. Like, what are we doing to uplift our Native, our Black, our Afro-Latino voices? What are we doing? What are we doing for our Afro-Latinx friends? So, we have a coal ash dumping problem. Scott Pruitt says EPA will, this is from Think Progress. Scott Pruitt says EPA will reconsider rules safeguarding communities from coal ash. This came out 4 months ago. All right. The Environmental Protection Agency plans to, quote unquote, reconsider portions of a 2015 rule that provides safeguards for communities located near toxic ash waste sites. Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt said Wednesday in a letter to industry officials. The clean water protections that Pruitt now wants to revisit mark the first substantive steps the EPA has taken to protect the public from coal ash, according to Sierra Club. Pruitt's decision, quote-unquote, jeopardizes the safety of those communities that depend on waterways and groundwater supplies near where coal ash pits are located, unquote. the environmental group said Thursday. Coal ash has high levels of toxic heavy metals like arsenic, mercury, and lead, which can cause serious health problems, including cancer, kidney disease, reproductive problems, and birth defects. The EPA administrator sent the letter only days after Hurricane Irma and Harvey plowed through regions of the United States and Puerto Rico. Central Puerto Rico, places like Utuado, Humacao, got devastated by Irma. There are people in the center of Puerto Rico who haven't had power since Hurricane Irma. Let that sink in. A large number of coal ash dumps. All right, so these hurricanes plowed through these areas. Fortunately, none of the coal ash sites in the southeast or Texas was damaged or spilled as a result of either hurricane. At least that's what they report. That's what they're saying to us. Watch, like, in the next year or, like, the next administration, we're all of a sudden gonna find out, oh, wait, it did spill and the companies lied to us. Because that's what always happens every single time. Watch. AES Puerto Rico and the Utility Solid Waste Activities Group, an industry group whose members include electric utility associations and hundreds of electric utilities, filed petitions in May challenging the rule. After reviewing your petitions, I have decided that it is appropriate and in the public interest to reconsider the provisions of the final rule addressed in your petitions in light of the issues raised in your petitions, Pruitt wrote in his letter. In its court petition, the Utility Solid Waste Activities Group asked, among other things, that deadlines in the rule be pushed back. In its petitions, AES cited Puerto Rico's economic problems as a reason to reduce the quote-unquote significant burdens the rule would impose on it for the on-site storage of coal ash. In Puerto Rico, a AES coal-fired power plant disposes of its waste in a 5-story high ash pile. Days before Irma hit the island, Puerto Rico's Environmental Quality Board ordered the operator to cover the ash pile to protect against hurricane-force winds spreading toxic dust and creating contaminated runoff. Earth Justices Diane Carman wrote Tuesday in a blog post, Irma reportedly did not cause damage or spread any of the coal ash at the Puerto Rico site. I'm calling BS on all of this. I do not believe for a second that did not happen. I do not trust the U.S. government. Of course, this is my opinion. I'm not trying to impose my views on you. But like I said, do not be surprised within the next year or so that all of a sudden we're going to hear, oh, there's all of a sudden higher cancer rates and all of this horrible stuff is happening to these people. And then they're going to investigate it. And all of a sudden they're going to find, oh, well, coal ash leaked into the groundwater because of the lack of infrastructure and oh, la la la. And, Puerto Rico's poor. And since we've demonized poor people in this country because of capitalism to the point where they're subhuman, who cares they have cancer? Who cares if our workers die before they're 50? At least the companies don't have to pay them anymore. At least the companies don't have to give them health insurance. At least the company doesn't have to take care of its workers. This is what end-stage capitalism looks like. And like I said, keep listening. I'll explain further. Pruitt's decision comes ahead of opening arguments in a court case contesting the rule in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. The court has scheduled oral argument for October 17th in the industry challenge to the rule. The EPA is likely to ask the court to place the case on hold while it reconsiders the rule. Pruitt's letter is widely considered to be a ploy to scrap up the protections entirely, benefiting coal plant owners eager to avoid accountability for the substantial public health dangers their coal ash pits pose to communities living near them, the Sierra Club said. I don't really trust the Sierra Club, but there is enough data out there that supports that notion that coal ash is dangerous, it's radioactive, it's toxic. Scott Pruitt, the current head of the EPA, does not give a crap about protecting the environment. But more importantly, protecting the environment, yes, it's vital, right? But more importantly, if we cared about people, if we cared about Puerto Ricans, we would be taking care of the environment. It's a natural conclusion. If we take care of the human beings, that we're taking care of the environment. Because without an environment, without a healthy environment, we do not have healthy people. If we took care of Puerto Ricans, we would have a safe, clean world to live in. But in order for capitalism, in order for the oligarchs, in order for the elites to maintain control over the people, they have to poison the communities. These people do not care about us. Because at the end of the day, they're going to be able to afford $60 gallons of water. They're going to be able to afford $20 bushels of organic broccoli. They do not care about the bottom 97%. They just don't. We're not in the equation. We don't have health care, guys. We don't have universal health care. We don't have a functioning justice system. We don't have a... Do you see the two tiers? It's not... Income inequality has become so great that it is the rich elites and it is the struggling poor. And then those people have an illusion of having money. There's more debt in this world than there is wealth. That's what people need to start waking up to. I wanted to read that article from Think Progress to give you an idea. And I'm going to keep giving you facts, giving you data, because that is the point of knowledge tax, is to provide you this information. So the article from Vox continues. Federal officials are sending mixed messages on waste cleanup. EPA now has its work cut out for itself on Puerto Rico. The agency currently has 125 personnel on the ground on the island with a priority of restoring clean drinking water to residents. Workers are taking measurements and monitoring sites to see if the toxic patches have moved and are desperately trying to grapple with the scale of the environmental cleanup challenge that lies ahead. All right. Now, you hear the description of this horrible, horrific situation, this emergency that is taking place. And yet we're sending all these police officers to Puerto Rico, and we're sending all of this stuff, and Whitefish Energy with its only 2 employees when it first did its bidding and got when it first acquired the contract with Prepa and all of this weird sketchy stuff, and that they were up to like 300 workers to restore power to 3.5 million people. And then you're hearing the scale of the cleanup challenges and the fact that they only had 300 people at one point, according to them, Whitefish Energy, working on the island on the power outage situation. And on the other side of the coin, here we have a description saying, you hear the immensity of work that needs to be done in Puerto Rico, and yet the lack of aid going to the island. Are you observing, are you hearing the discrepancies of what is needed and what has been provided? This is what happens when you have to profitize everything. Nothing gets done. Has nothing to do with incentive. If the only incentive is making money, are we really creating a society that is built on community? Or are we building a society that is based on competition and individualistic end goals where the only focus is self-serving. Because that's what America is a bunch of self-serving, greedy assholes who are controlling all of the resources and stealing resources through brute force. Like in Africa, like Eric Prince wanted to lobby basically for the privatization of the military and privatize the war in Afghanistan alongside with, if you guys don't recall, when Steve Bannon was in the administration with Kushner in this summer of I think it was July of 2017, right? So there's this ongoing stealing resources from black and brown people and wanting to privatize war. And then Eric Prince's sister, none other than Betsy DeVos, who wants to privatize education. And do you really think these elites care about religion? No, they claim that religion, they hide behind religion, and they use it to indoctrinate people to become workers. Right, that's the whole point of why the Bible was formulated the way it was formulated by King James, was in order to indoctrinate people and control people. And you can disagree with me, and there's going to be plenty of episodes, trust and believe me, baby. I'm going to be explaining all of this stuff and why I believe what I believe, and you can disagree, that's fine. But like these elites don't care about you, and they really don't believe in God, because if they did, then they'd be, Jesus himself said, you give all of your wealth to all of the people, and you help the poor, and you help the humble, because the meek and the humble will inherit the earth. Right, I always go back to the Beatitudes, because that's the one thing in Catholic school that I had to memorize, which honestly, like, I would have to go back and read the Beatitudes again, but I used to have them memorized. It was a requirement in Catholic school. You know, that was the one thing that always, like, you know, I always clung to, because it's true. Like, the meek and the humble shall inherit the earth, the poor, you know, the thirsty. Those are the people who we need to help. Those are the people who deserve our attention and our love. Because first of all, they shouldn't even be out in the streets. It's 6 degrees outside. There are people sleeping in this. In Ohio, a dog froze to death on somebody's porch. All right? What do you think is going on with the humans that are outside? Anyway, so going back to the article. The agency's leadership, however, has sent some mixed signals about how it prioritizes environmental cleanup. EPA Administrator Pruitt is undoing the agency's work on air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, fulfilling a fossil fuel industry wish list. Pruitt is also backing major budget cuts and is aiming to reduce the agency's headcount. However, right, because the less people that are in the EPA, the less people are doing the work to protect the environment. It's fascism 101. Right? Fascism is the less people that are in government, the less people who are monitoring what the ruling class, what the elites are doing, and how they're poisoning these communities to make a profit off us. Because if we have poisoned water, we're going to buy bottled water. We're going to buy gallons of plastic water jugs in order to prevent our children from drinking contaminated water. Only if we can afford it, because those of us who can't afford those amenities, those luxuries, are going to be forced to drink poisoned water from Superfund sites like those people in Puerto Rico. Pruitt's also pledged support for Superfund cleanup, which makes sense given that there are Superfund sites all over the country, including coal, oil, and gas-producing regions. Quote, Superfund is the one program Administrator Pruitt is not trying to obliterate, unquote, said Innick, and that's Judith from earlier in the article. But then, Pruitt has also proposed cutting funds for Superfund litigation at the Department of Justice that gets polluters to pay for cleanup. All this makes it hard to gauge the federal government's commitment to controlling toxic waste, creating uncertainty for Puerto Ricans rebuilding in the wake of the recent hurricane. Pete Lopez, the newly appointed head of EPA Region 2, acknowledged the enormity of the task ahead and sustained effort it requires. Quote, "From my experience, communities that are struggling financially are going to be the hardest pressed to respond," unquote, he said. "There has been a long-term commitment which not only includes engagement, but provides timely resources as needed." So that's the end of that article. We have all this information. I'm going to play you a clip from Democracy Now! Of an interview with a leader of an independentist group, an independista. Her name eludes me at the moment.
DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. We begin today's show in Puerto Rico, where 3.5 million residents and half the island's hospitals still have no electricity from the power grid.
FYI, heads up. This was published on Democracy Now's YouTube, and I'm playing it from my phone. We're very budget here. And it was published October 24th, 2017.
Than a month after Hurricane Maria. Over 1 million people still lack clean drinking water, and residents say they are suffering from eye infections and gastrointestinal diseases as a result of exposure to contaminated water. More than a third of the island's sewage treatment plants are not functioning, and some 40% of residents lack a cell phone signal. Meanwhile, the Environmental Protection Agency has not yet inspected 5 out of 18 of Puerto Rico's toxic waste sites, also known as Superfund sites. The official death toll now stands at 49, with health experts saying the real number is likely to rise.
On Monday, FEMA announced more than $500 million in aid to the island, including $285 million to help restore electricity and water services. The Senate also tentatively...
This is despite the fact that estimates, if I recall correctly, were $95 billion worth of damage on the island after Hurricane Maria. I just wanted to add that.
Approved a $36.5 billion hurricane relief package that includes aid for Puerto Rico. A final vote is expected later today before the measure heads to President Trump. But first, Republican Senators Jeff Flake of Arizona and Mike Lee of Utah are demanding Puerto Rico be made permanently exempt from the Jones Act.
By the way, like I said, this was reported on October 24th. I just want to give you an update. The Jones Act was lifted for 10 days, and it was reenacted right afterwards. And it's still enacted. The Jones Act is still imposed upon us. It needs to be completely obliterated. I completely agree. But, you know, America needs its money. Those elites who have monopolized the sending of goods to Puerto Rico have been prioritized by Trump over the millions of people who live on the island. I mean, that's what it is at the end of the day.
Jeff Flake of Arizona and Mike Lee of Utah are demanding Puerto Rico be made permanently exempt from the Jones Act, a 1920 law that has complicated efforts to send supplies to the hurricane-ravaged island. All of this comes, as President Trump said on Thursday, his administration deserves a 10 out of 10 for its response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Puerto Rico.
I think we've done a really great job, and we've had tremendous cooperation.
Oh, yeah, so I'm going to describe the scene I'm watching right now. So Rosello is sitting next to Trump as he congratulates himself on how well his efforts are. Let's take a listen.
I think we've done a really great job, and we've had tremendous cooperation from the governor, and we are getting there, and people are really seeing the effort that's been put into Puerto Rico. It's been a very, very difficult situation for many people, I will say that. It hit right through the middle of the island, right through the middle of Puerto Rico. There's never been anything like that. I give ourselves a 10.
Puerto Rico is saddled with a
Que bochorno, que bochorno, que bochorno, que bochorno, que bochorno. Oh my God. Rosello. What are you doing? Nene. ¿Qué está haciendo? This dude is literally selling out the Puerto Rican people just like his dad.
I think for many people, I will say that. It hit right through the middle of the island, right through the middle of Puerto Rico. There's never been anything like that. I give ourselves a 10.
Puerto Rico is saddled with a $74 billion debt and now faces an estimated $95 billion in storm-related damage. Many are now questioning what the recovery effort will look like, who will benefit, who will be left out. In a new piece for The Intercept, Puerto Rican activist Elizabeth Jean-Pierre and Naomi Klein write, "Imagine a Puerto Rico recovery designed by Puerto Ricans." They write, "The fact that the House-approved relief package contains $5 billion in loans for the island rather than grants is a special kind of cruelty, because on an island already suffering under an unpayable $74 billion debt and another $49 billion in unfunded pension obligations, Puerto Ricans understand all too well that debt is not relief. On the contrary, it's a potent tool of perpetual impoverishment and control from which relief is urgently needed." The authors also look at how communities in Puerto Rico are now working together to achieve a more just recovery. For more, we go to Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. She's joining us from Berkeley, California, Executive Director of UPROSE and co-chair of the Climate Justice Alliance. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Elizabeth.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead through this interview. Around 9.5 minutes, I believe. That is where I want to start this clip. Like I said, I'm going to include this interview, and I will include a link to Jean-Pierre's and Klein's article in the show notes.
Interestingly, you're in San Francisco right now, and just north of you, of course, you've got this urban conflagration that has consumed parts of Napa. Santa Rosa is a wasteland in many parts. Can you talk about this issue of climate change and what isn't being talked about, even in the media that's covering the climate catastrophes, not mentioning that word global warming?
Yeah, it's amazing, Amy. You know, I'm Puerto Rican. I run an organization that was founded by Puerto Ricans 50 years ago, and I'm a climate justice activist, and it feels like my worlds have collided. You know, the situation in Puerto Rico is a model of extraction. For generations, the United States has basically extracted our land, our labor, and Puerto Rico has now become sort of the poster child for climate injustice. And I refer to the 55,000 people have already left Puerto Rico in 33 days. And I think of them as climate refugees. Hurricane Maria came on the heels of Irma, on the heels of Harvey, in Houston. We're right here in the Bay where there are all these wildfires, and I'm actually here in a meeting with It Takes Roots, which is made up of the Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, the Climate Justice Alliance, the Indigenous Environmental Network, Right to the City. All of us really grappling on how do you build just transitions in communities that are faced with a crisis that's already here. So Puerto Rico is really a front line, and because its unique relationship with the United States, it makes it particularly vulnerable, because other places, you know, if we're talking about Houston and exposure to toxics and toxicants, that was something that we saw coming years ago. You mentioned that I've been doing this for a while, and it's true. I was the chair of the U.S. EPA National Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and many years ago I was talking about what do we do about industrial waterfront communities in the event of an extreme weather event. Is the EPA...
Friendly reminder, like we've been going on and on about on this episode, Puerto Rico was a manufacturing hub for a long time. And one of the things that we manufactured on the island, like in Barceloneta, which is literally known as like the home of boners worldwide, were pharmaceuticals. And the dumping, the chemicals, what happens with the residual waste? It becomes a Superfund site. And now people are drinking from those Superfund sites in Puerto Rico over 100 days later. Also, don't you doubt for a second that this still isn't affecting people on the island, that this isn't going to permanently affect people and make an impression on them until they pass away and die. Being without electricity for over 100 days is a traumatic experience in the modern world. Especially when you see, if you have access to a television at any point in the day, sitcoms and Americans, you're only a minute or two of the news and you've been without power for over 100 days. What do you think these Puerto Rican people are feeling? They feel desperate. They feel unheard. They feel neglected. They feel cast aside. They feel like second-class citizens. So I'm gonna let her finish. I'm gonna let Elizabeth finish talking. Hold on.
Alliance, the Climate Justice Alliance, the Indigenous Environmental Network, Right to the City, all of us really grappling on how do you build just transitions in communities that are facing. What are we doing about that? And at the time, and it was under the Obama, if we have an extreme weather event, many years ago, I was talking about what do we do about industrial waterfront communities in the event of an extreme weather event? Is the EPA ready to address that issue? If we have an extreme weather event, Superfunds then basically overflow. Chemical exposure will cause disease for generations. What are we doing about that? And at the time, and it was under the Obama administration, the NEJAC didn't want to address climate change. They just wanted to talk about environmental justice in the traditional sense. And then New York City was hit by Sandy, and we were allowed to create a working group to address that. So we were able to do a study that kind of sat there, and with recommendations from people from industrial waterfront communities, and the study just sat there, collecting dust. And then Harvey happened, and Houston then becomes the exact thing that we were predicting. And then here in Puerto Rico, we've got 23 Superfunds, 23 Superfunds that have now flooded and affected everything, so that even as people make their way through their communities to try to clean up, they're being exposed to any number of chemicals. There is no one is looking at the EJ executive order that really sort of says, you've got to have an interagency approach to addressing these issues. What's the quality of the air? What's the quality of the water? What is the quality of the soil? Are people protected? Are they wearing protective gear? What's the exposure again to toxics and toxicants? So all of that is happening in Puerto Rico. In a tiny island that was just literally just slaughtered by this hurricane. So we knew that this was coming. Of course, we're not prepared. We were never prepared for it. But Puerto Rico really is sadly that poster child of climate change. And so folks can deny that it's here, but honestly, our scientists are telling us, 99% of the scientists are telling us that it's global warming.
So yeah, that's the clips of that interview from Democracy Now! That I wanted to share. The next article I want to cover is from the Washington Post. FEMA says most of Puerto Rico has potable water. That can't be true. So remember how I told you that government agencies, I know that Paula, tú suena como un, conspiracy theorist person, and, Paula, what are you talking about, the oligarchs? You sound like Alex Jones. This sounds like some Alex Jones. Well, let me explain, because Alex Jones is a crazy white supremacist nut job. Do not get me wrong. Do not get it twisted, baby. I know for a fact that he is crazy. But when he talks about the elites and the global elites, that part, that's how he gets people drawn into it. That's why Alex Jones is a gateway to white supremacy. Because he gets people with the half-truths. These dumb, ignorant, white, Euro-American people, they know that they're getting gypped but they don't want to take responsibility for what their ancestors did. They just want to blame black and brown people for why they're not getting equal pay, right? This country is for white people. This country was the genocide of Native people that still is happening today. The genocide of black people. All of this horrible, horrendous stuff, our prison system and the way it's built, the 13th Amendment and the way it's worded, all of that stuff, all of those actions that were made by rich, elite, Euro-American white men, they were created in that fashion in order to perpetuate genocide against black and brown people. And the elites, the way they do that by controlling the masses is by convincing the poor Euro-white workers, the Euro-American white workers, that the black and brown people are the ones who are out to get them, not the black and brown people, not the other poor people. Because if all the poor people looked at their blood and when they shed it and how it was red, and they all looked at each other and was like, the only thing that's different between us is our cultures and how we were raised and how we think, maybe, just maybe, it's the rich white Euro-American elites who are killing us and poisoning our communities. And if we all stood up against them, there's more of us than there are of them. I mean, that's why the Walton family, they built like a crazy expensive bunker. Because they're afraid of us. They're afraid of the bottom 97% rising up and saying the ruling class, the people in Congress, the 535 people in Congress, and let's be honest, including Bernie Sanders, because what is he doing right now? What is Bernie Sanders doing right now? Like, all these people who are obsessed with Bernie Sanders. Like, what? Where's the revolution? How is it happening? Oh, I don't see it. The black and brown people of Puerto Rico are still suffering. And, like, let's be honest, Bernie Sanders is an older individual. I fully understand that. I'm not ageist here. I'm not trying to be like, Bernie is the only one and da-da-da-da. No, that's the thing, though. These people are still elites. They still control wealth, majority of wealth in this country. The government is not getting less racist. It's gotten more racist. And I'm not saying, let's blame Bernie. But what I am saying is, okay, what Bernie's doing isn't enough. And now we need more people to wake up and start doing the work. Because we cannot depend on one old Euro-American white dude to do the work. We just cannot. We cannot depend on one white dude to do the work. We cannot depend on him to lead this movement. We have to do it for ourselves. There's just not enough being done. And just because you supported Bernie Sanders, that's not enough work. You're not doing the work. If you're still saying that the election was robbed, absolutely. The DNC is corrupt. Absolutely. I'm not saying that. But, because this is that whataboutism. Because anytime I speak up and I'm like, well, Bernie could have done more. Oh, Paula, how dare you talk about the guy, the demagoguery? How dare you? How dare you accuse us of cult of personality? What have you done for Puerto Ricans? What have you done to better the situation of black and brown people in this country? What have you done to get rid of white supremacy globally? And if all I hear are crickets, and your only response is, well, I supported Bernie Sanders and I worked on his campaign, and it's just too much work. Let me tell you what's too much work. Going to a Superfund site and getting water, because that's the only place that you can get water from. Because if you don't get water and 90-degree heat and 90% humidity, that you're going to die. That your child is going to die. You tell me that it's too much work after you make a bottle of formula for your baby with poisoned water. Then you tell me how hard your day was. I dare you. I'm over here trying my best, go do whatever work you feel is necessary for you to do. Support who you need to support. But you also need to remember that there are actual human beings who live next door to you who don't have food. That there are people out in the streets right now who don't have a shelter. That there are people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. That there are people on food stamps who work 2 jobs, who can't provide for their family, who can't give their kid lunch money, who cannot give their child dinner, who rely on a backpack program to fill their backpacks full of canned goods every weekend so they have something to eat. So going back to this article, the Washington Post, all right? FEMA says most of Puerto Rico has potable water. That can't be true. This article came out December 21st, 2017, not that long ago. The weeks after Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico brought remarkable images of people desperate to find clean water, thrusting containers under makeshift spigots on the sides of mountains. According to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, this particular problem has subsided now, more than 3 months after the storm. FEMA's official statistics on Puerto Rico, which rely on data provided by the territory, suggest that 95% of Puerto Ricans now have access to potable water. That just isn't possible. I'm a lawyer at the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I specialize in toxics and drinking water. Before Hurricane Maria, I worked with local groups in Puerto Rico on drinking water contamination on the island. We put out a report in May showing that in 2015, 99.5% of Puerto Ricans, virtually all residents, were served by water sources that violated the Safe Drinking Water Act. These violations included contamination, failure to properly treat the water, and failure to conduct water testing or to report as required by federal rules. A substantial majority, 69.4% of the population, was drawing tap water that had unlawfully high levels of contaminants, such as chloroform, bacteria, disinfection byproducts, and volatile organic compounds, or that had not been treated in accordance with federal standards. Even as mainland coverage of water access and quality issues in Puerto Rico has receded, overshadowed by chatter about the latest political crises and tax breaks in Washington, the hurricane has made an already bad water situation far worse, and by veiling the true extent of the damage, FEMA's misleading statistics on water are exacerbating these problems. First, it's important to clarify what potable water means. FEMA draws its potable water data from the Puerto Rican government's numbers on water service restoration. But in legal parlance, potability refers to something beyond just access, compliance with federal, state, and territorial safety standards for drinking water. 2 months after Maria hit the island, Puerto Ricans were saying that odorous, discolored, and ill-tasting water was flowing from their taps. The NRDC recently obtained the results of tests performed by the Puerto Rico Department of Health and the EPA showing that bacterial contamination in tap water was a potentially widespread problem in Puerto Rico as late as November. This isn't surprising. Puerto Rico has old and leaky water systems. About half of its water is lost in distribution each year. That vulnerability makes drinking water especially susceptible to contamination in the wake of an extreme weather event like a hurricane. Second, power problems are water problems by another name, and a substantial portion of the island is still in the dark, according to the government of Puerto Rico. 34% of the territory, more than 1 million people, remains without power. Power and water are intimately connected. Water treatment plants are hooked to the electricity grid and rely on consistent energy. When treatment plants and pumping stations are propped up with generators, power can and does fail, resulting in frequent water shutoffs. As the island's water authority indicates, local officials in Puerto Rico say their water service typically goes in and out, which I experienced multiple times visiting my family on the island since 2010. I try to go to the island every 2 years and visit my family, and I love them very much and very dearly. And in 2015, I remember there was a drought, and they would have water every 4 days. I believe it was every 4 days, if I recall correctly. And I visited for a month, I think, that year. And I stayed at my aunt's house, and you would have water for 1 day, and she had all of these jugs, and she would fill up the jugs with water. And this was in 2015. So we would have water to drink, water to shower, and water to use to clean food, to dishes for the rest of the week. So she'd have all these 1 gallon, 2 gallon, I'm trying to remember the brand, but there's a brand that, the bodybuilders, when they're at the gym and they have the square water jugs with the handle, it's white. I forgot the name of the brand of that water, but she would have a bunch of jugs like that, and she would fill them up, and that's what we would use to drink water, to, like I said, cleaning. Imagine all the stuff you do with running water. Americans really take running especially white Euro Americans, you guys take clean water to just wash your clothes in for granted. Just imagine all the water that you use on the daily. All of it's treated. All of the water you use, even to wash your clothes, is treated with chemicals. So, don't get it twisted. Y'all, we are so blessed. We are so blessed. But it's also at the expense of black and brown people. So, how blessed are we, right? We're kind of cursed. The way we live is it's really cursed. We're poisoning the environment, doing all kinds of horrible stuff. So, there's that. Anyways, the article continues. There are numerous accounts of waterborne disease and bacterial illness in Puerto Rico, and it goes on to the leptospirosis, and that's the rat urine disease that's what I refer to it as. Whether these illnesses are caused by floodwaters, drinking water, or other sources of water exposure, they are a cause for serious concern. Puerto Rico needs help to fix its water beyond repairing the hurricane damage. The local energy utilities' debts are well documented, and the malaise of its water authority is less known. Last year, the EPA closed off vital federal funds for water infrastructure upgrades on the island, a potential lifeline for the ailing utility, because the local agency couldn't pay back previous loans. Meanwhile, the government of Puerto Rico has said that the majority of its water infrastructure was affected by the hurricane. Puerto Rico's historic record of non-compliance with drinking water standards, its water authority's beleaguered budget, and the fragility of its aging water distribution systems mean FEMA's claim that most of the residents are receiving potable water is at best misleading, and at worst simply untrue. Most Puerto Ricans aren't getting consistently potable water before the storm pummeled the island's already strained infrastructure. But FEMA's disaster relief statistics are important. They're typically how Congress judges how much money it needs to appropriate after major disasters, which means they will influence what lawmakers are willing to put into Puerto Rico's water infrastructure and the island's rebuilding more generally. Such representations can mask major health threats and hamstring a robust federal response. Puerto Ricans deserve better. They deserve safe and accessible water. So, Puerto Ricans don't have access to clean drinking water, and it's been that way for decades, probably. And majority of Americans in the United States on the mainland don't have access to clean drinking water. Study after study has found. Don't believe me? Google it. Google it. Google it before you come for me. Because I had someone who submitted to me the testing of water in Tennessee, and they found lead in water in Tennessee. I just cannot recall what county or municipality it was, but this is happening all over the country. It's Flint, Michigan. It's Ohio. I'm trying to think of other well-known cases that have been documented. Here in Kentucky Utilities, there was a lake. The name eludes me at the moment. That was poisoned. So, I mean, this is happening all over the country. I mean, this is nothing new. So, this report came from CNN, and I feel that it's an important reminder to inform people about what's happening and what has happened on the island, because these types of trauma will affect my people for a long time. These types of trauma will affect Puerto Ricans for a long time. Desperate Puerto Ricans, this is from CNN, are drinking from a hazardous waste site. Jose Luis Rodriguez waited in line Friday to fill plastic jugs in the back of his pickup truck with water for drinking, doing the dishes, and bathing. But there is something about this water Rodriguez didn't know. He didn't even know. It was being pumped to him by water authorities from a federally designated hazardous waste site. CNN learned after reviewing Superfund documents and interviewing federal and local officials. Rodriguez, 66, vulnerable elder, guys, is so desperate for water that this news didn't startle him. Quote, "I don't have a choice," he said. "This is the only option I have," unquote. More than 3 weeks after Hurricane Maria ravaged the island, more than 35% of the island's residents, American citizens, I hate when people rephrase, whose American citizenship was imposed upon them, is what it really should say, remain without safe drinking water. It's clear some residents are turning to potentially risky sources to get by. Friday afternoon, CNN watched workers from the Puerto Rican water utility distribute water from a well at the Dorado groundwater contamination site, which is a Superfund site, which was listed in 2016 as part of the federal Superfund program for hazardous waste cleanup. Residents like Rodriguez filled small bottles from a hose and piled them in their vehicles. Large trucks with cylindrical tanks on their backs carried the water to people elsewhere. Some of the trucks carried the name of the municipality of Dorado. Others were simply labeled with the words, agua potable. Martin Smith, a professor of toxicology at the University of California, Berkeley, told CNN the levels of PCE and chloroform would be essentially safe for human consumption. Quote, I wouldn't have any problem in drinking this water if these were the only chemicals in it, he said. The problem with Superfund sites, he says, is that you don't know what else is present. EPA gathering more information, and this is in the quotes. It's unclear whether there are public health risks from this particular well, however. Okay. The EPA is gathering more information about the quality of water from the wells associated with our Dorado groundwater contamination site, as well as other Superfund sites in Puerto Rico, the agency said in a statement issued to CNN on Friday. While some of these wells are sometimes used to provide drinking water, the EPA is concerned that people could be drinking water that may be contaminated. Depending on the well, we are mindful of the paramount job of protecting people's health balanced with people's basic need for water. All right. Regional EPA spokesman Elias Rodriguez confirmed the location is part of a Superfund site. The article continues. People waiting in line for water on Friday were largely unaware of these concerns. Some of them had heard the EPA announce this week that it had received reports that Puerto Ricans were getting water from Superfund sites, but those interviewed assumed that that wasn't this well. Mayra Perez, a 59-year-old retiree, expressed pride in the quality of water. Of course. I'm sure there are no chemicals in this water. Just because you think there's no chemicals in the water doesn't mean that there is. And that this goes to show you that CNN will interview anybody and let them say whatever the hell they want, regardless of how dangerous it is, potentially. The experts, the people who have studied these chemicals, are saying that it's cancerous, it's carcinogenic, that people can die if they drink this water over time. That it's I mean, if you're desperate, you know, it's desperation that these people, the only reason why these people are drinking this water is out of desperation. And the fact that Puerto Ricans haven't had access to that the drinking water on the island hasn't been in accordance to say the Safe Drinking Water Act is completely ludicrous, and just goes to show how ignorant the American populace has become and how dishonest the elites are. And I'm surprised that more people haven't woken up to this fact. Like, this is public information. This is just a Google search away. This isn't complicated. This isn't rocket science. This is simple reading comprehension skills that I'm using to find this information. You vet your sources. You look, I'm not an expert on what is and what isn't dangerous, but if I have the EPA, like, not Scott Pruitt, but I have experts who have been studying drinking water, and that's like their focus, that's like their master degree, that they spent years and years and years studying this stuff. They know more about it than I do, and if they do it for a living, I'm gonna hope and assume that they know what they're talking about. And if they're telling me that it's cancerous, that it's carcinogenic, that it's dangerous to drink, and then this poor older woman this poor Puerto Rican retiree is telling me that the water is safe to drink, should I trust her or should I trust the expert? I don't know. You decide, right? No, you should trust the expert. They know what they're talking about. There are children drinking this water. There were children drinking this water. Aixa Chevere, a mother of two, said she would find a new source of water if this site has shown to be contaminated. Already the family spends 3 to 4 hours per day waiting in lines for basic services and goods, including water. We would boil the water or search for bottled water. If it were dangerous, she said, we would find some other alternative. There are still boiling advisories on the island right now for water in January. Like, I hope you guys know, like, this is a problem that's still happening right now, as the article I read from the Washington Post, that lawyer had stated. This is interesting. So, I'm looking for, I was looking for, another article, but I found this instead. EPA touts progress on cleanup of 7 hazardous Superfund sites, and this came out January 2nd. In the Washington Examiner. The Environmental Protection Agency is starting off the new year claiming progress on cleaning up the nation's most contaminated toxic land areas, known as Superfund sites. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announced Tuesday the agency removed all or parts of 7 Superfund sites from the national priorities list, which includes locations that most urgently need cleanup of toxic chemicals. Quote, we have made it a priority to get these sites cleaned up faster and in the right way, Pruitt said Tuesday. The EPA says 3 sites have been completely removed from the priority list, meaning the agency says no further cleanup is needed at them. These sites are Truck and Castor Company in Minnesota, contaminated with the same chemicals, trichloroethylene in groundwater. SPAC landfill in Massachusetts, and Perdido groundwater contamination in Alabama. That's news to me, because as far as I know, it takes years and years and years to clean a Superfund site, but I don't know, maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, so. According to this, Scott Pruitt is speeding up the process, and that was his goal, and all this stuff. But simply because you remove a name off of a list doesn't automatically mean that those chemicals are going to go away. And with all of the budget cuts to the EPA and the lack of funding and the lack of positions within the EPA and the lack of people doing the work in the EPA, I'm very curious how all of this is getting cleaned up and why it's happening so quickly. But that's just me. You can read the article at the Washington Examiner, and I'm definitely going to keep an eye on this because I think it's very unusual that all of a sudden Superfund sites are getting taken off this list. Are they really being properly cleaned? You know, that's just very odd. Here's an article from The Hill. The article is called, EPA removes 7 cleaned up sites from Superfund list. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt is touting the deletions as a victory in his mission to chip away at the 1,300 or so sites for which the agency is overseeing cleanups. We have made it a priority to get these sites cleaned up faster and in the right way, Pruitt said in a Tuesday statement announcing the deletions. By creating, and see, I don't trust this guy because here he is trying to reverse all this safeguards against coal ash that's causing cancer in communities actively, especially from what I hear in West Virginia. You know, all of these horrible things that are happening. And I don't trust this guy because he's a liar and he's going to lie to us in order to further his agenda, which he's in the pockets of the rich and he is an elite. So, you know, and as if I recall correctly, Scott Pruitt has a history of suing the EPA as a businessman before being appointed by Trump to be in his administration. You can fact check me on that, but I do believe that is the case. Quote, by creating a streamlined task force and making major remedy decisions that hold potentially responsible parties accountable for cleanup, the Superfund program is carrying out the agency's mission of protecting human health and the environment more every day. Pruitt wants Superfund to be a top priority in his time at the EPA, while he's working to roll back regulations across numerous areas in the agency's purview, like climate change, air pollution, and water pollution. In 2016, the EPA only deleted 2 Superfund sites, one complete and one partial. But previous years showed similar or higher deletion records. The EPA removed 7 sites in 2015, 15 in 2014, and 12 in 2013. The sites that were completely removed from the Superfund list in 2017, I've already gone over that. All of those sites were first put on the Superfund list in the early 1980s and were only ready for removal last year. So let's highlight that. They were already going to be removed. That is the catch there. It takes time to clean up these chemicals because these chemicals have to decay because a lot of them are radioactive. And a lot of these chemicals take decades, centuries, millennia to break down. It looks to me that the removal of these Superfund sites is because over time they are removed. And I'll probably have to look into this more, of course. This is another CNN report. EPA water at Puerto Rico's Superfund site is fit for consumption. Water drawn from wells at a hazardous waste site in hurricane-hit Puerto Rico meets federal drinking water standards and is fit for consumption, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency said in a news release on Tuesday, and this was October 31st of last year. The water being pulled from wells at the Dorado groundwater contamination site, which is part of the Superfund program for hazardous waste cleanup, meets federal drinking water standards for certain industrial chemicals as well as for bacteria. Elias Rodriguez, an EPA spokesperson, said on CNN, "The water is okay to consume based on the analysis we have done." CNN previously reported that desperate locals had been breaking into wells on the Dorado hazardous waste site in search of water following Hurricane Maria, which ravaged the island about 6 weeks ago. 18% of households in Puerto Rico remained without working taps. Of course, this is back then. And also, like established in the Washington Post article, a lot of the water on the island, and by the way, that was reported at the end of December, like a week and a half ago, that most of the water on the island is not really safe to drink as before the hurricanes, and especially now after the hurricanes. So there's that. Quote, sampling at the site has found chemical contamination that is impacting wells used to supply drinking water to the local communities, unquote, the agency said at the time. Quote, drinking water with the solvents, which include tetrachloroethylene and trichlorothione, can have serious health impacts, including damage to the liver and increase, we already know this, it's a carcinogenic, it's going to increase the rates of cancer. Those chemicals were not present at unsafe levels in the water sample, Rodriguez said. I wouldn't drink that water. No way. No way. And like I said, why is it that it's acceptable for these chemicals to be found in this water at all, at any level, for black and brown people? And if this would be completely unacceptable in a white suburb. Completely unacceptable. Would you feel safe drinking this water? I wouldn't. Bacteria, which are also a concern in drinking water supplies after storms like Hurricane Maria, were also found to be at safe levels. I don't trust the U.S. government at all. Like, right now, we have this guy who's appointed, who wants to backtrack regulations on coal ash. Like, this is insanity. The Puerto Rican government has confirmed multiple deaths linked to waterborne illness since the hurricane. To the surprise of some people at the EPA, Rodriguez said some of the wells located on the Superfund site actually were collecting water from an aqueduct system that is not sourced from groundwater at the contaminated site. At two other wells, Santa Rosa and Nevares, the water was a mix of aqueduct water and groundwater pulled from the Superfund site, he said. But have you noticed that where did they get the water from? Where did they test it? Because in Flint, Michigan, they would say, oh, this water is safe to drink, and then they would test the water from a different source, and then all of a sudden it's, oh, this water is incredibly poisonous, Like, there are people in Flint, Michigan still without clean drinking water. There's a community in Texas that's predominantly people of color that hasn't had clean drinking water in over 10 years, and that's a report from The Guardian. There's in North Carolina, there's an area that doesn't have access to clean water. In Tennessee, there's lead in the water. Do you guys see the pattern? The U.S. government does not care about us. They will say, oh, we tested this water and it's safe to drink. And then all of a sudden you test the water from a different source in the same area and it's not safe to drink. So I find it dubious that the water is safe to drink. But like I said, I could be wrong. I'll wrap this article up with this last paragraph. Edwards, the Virginia Tech professor, said it is very unfortunate that anyone would have to drink from a well located on a Superfund site. But in the scheme of bad water available in Puerto Rico right now, this at least is microbiologically pure and shows low levels of chemicals with possible long-term health consequences. and shows low levels of chemicals with possible long-term health consequences. That's all you need to know. That last sentence. There's a possibility there are carcinogens in the water. You know, it's just statistically, what are those that, you know, they don't even know what, okay, how are you saying that it is safe to drink this water when you can't even determine what the long-term consequences are? That's all I need to know. So I've given you all this information. I'm informing you that you shouldn't trust the United States government, that it's not trustworthy. They do not have our best interests at heart. They do not take care of the people, that the only people who really take care of other people are the 97%, and we don't even do a good job of that, especially here on the mainland, where we have people outside dying from exposure because they're houseless, and you understand where I'm going with this? Like, look at our society. Look, we have people in Puerto Rico who were drinking from Superfund sites, and I cannot find any recent reports that they still are, but I'm assuming that they are, because these conditions in Puerto Rico are pretty much the same for a majority of the people on the island who, since Hurricane Maria. All right, these people are going to need mental health services. These people need help. Our people are, if you're Boricua in la diaspora, you need to listen to my first episode. It's essential that you listen to that. But we need to start doing the work. No one else is going to do it for us. We need to start re-educating the people in the mainland, and we need to start waking up the people, because here's the kicker, guys. So, originally this was going to be Whitefish Energy, but like I said, I got too discombobulated and unfocused, so, like I did in this episode, but there's just a lot of information I want to share with you guys, and I want to give this to you as best as I can, and like I said, I work 40 hours a week, so I'm going to do the best I can, and I don't have a lot of resources, but I'm gonna give it to you straight. I'm gonna give it to you real. I'm genuine. I'm not some phony. I'm out here trying to educate myself as well as others the best way I can with my loud Boricua boca. Listen up. So, originally I was gonna do this episode on Whitefish, and then I got really inspired to do it on, the water crisis in Puerto Rico, because I was scrolling through my Facebook, guys, and I found this article, and it cracked me up, dude. Hold up, let me find it real quick. So you want to know how little the elites really care about us? Like, I really need you guys to understand this, okay? And how little and how crazy they're, like, really crazy. The elites are insane. Business Insider. Silicon Valley elites are spending $60 for less than 3 gallons of dangerous unfiltered water, and it's flying off the shelves. In San Francisco, quote, unfiltered, untreated, unsterilized spring water, unquote, from a company called Live Water is selling for up to $61 for a decorative 2.5-gallon jug and is flying off the shelves, the New York Times reported. Startups dedicated to untreated water are also gaining steam. Zero Mass Water, which doesn't sell raw water, but sells tech that allows people to collect water from the atmosphere near their homes, has nearly raised $24 million in venture capital, the report says. People are gathering gallons of untreated water from natural springs, venturing out onto private property by night to get the water, according to the Times. Doug Evans, the founder of a startup called Juicero that shut down in September, told the Times that he and his friends brought 50 gallons of raw water to the Burning Man festival last year. I'm extreme about health. I know, but I'm not alone with this, Evans said. There are a lot of people doing this with me. You never know who you'll run into at the spring. Like, these people are drinking dangerous water. Dangerous freaking water. If you're so extreme about health, then why aren't you taking care of it? That's what I'm saying. On Tuesday, Business Insider's Melea Robinson visited a San Francisco supermarket where Live Water sells its untreated water. Rainbow Grocery was sold out of its Fountain of Truth spring water, but a sign indicated a slight price increase. The New York Times reported last week that Rainbow Grocery, a co-op in the city's Mission District, was selling a 2.5-gallon jug of the product from the startup Live Water for $36.99. As of Tuesday, the same jug cost $38.49 due to Live Water raising its prices. The co-op also sells a decorative jug for $60.99. And then in Puerto Rico, we have people without running water. And here in Silicon Valley, we have people buying a decorative 2.5-gallon jug of untreated, unfiltered water for $61.99. And you're telling me that capitalism is good and that people, the elites, are good people and they create jobs and trickle-down economics is a thing. Seriously, take several fucking seats and shut the up and tell me about my life. Fucking dare you. I dare you to tell me about my life. So, as I'm doing more research into this, not the Live Water stuff, I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's essential for people to know how apathetic the elites really freaking are and how sociopathic and psychopathic these Euro-Americans are, these white Euro-Americans living in a probably gentrified area in San Francisco, California. Right, as people literally suffer without water in Puerto Rico right now. I remember the CEO of Nestle who made some comments, and it was a big controversy a while ago. So this is reported from CNBC. Nestle chairman, time to turn off the water taps. The world will run out of fresh water long before it runs out of oil, with the potential of major deficits by 2030. Thus, when you look up a global water crisis, you have a long list of all of these places experiencing droughts and famine. Some argue that the Syrian civil war right now, started because of the famines in 2014. So, I mean, climate change is fueling wars, like the food wars, Hunger Games, it's already here. It's just not here in the mainland in the continental United States because we're cushioned by the fact that that the Euro-white Americans are nasty, messed up, imperialist pigs who are stealing resources from all over the world. So let me continue with this article. So we are already here with the deficits of water, but apparently, we're running into those deficits a bit early, I guess. The world will run out of fresh water long before it runs out of oil, with the potential for major deficits by 2030. The chairman of bottled water giant Nestle said, "We have a major water management crisis." Peter Brabeck Lemaitre told CNBC on the sidelines of the Credit Suisse Asian Investment Conference on Tuesday. Quote, "We are destroying 20% more water for human consumption than there is available," unquote. Around 1.2 billion people, or almost 1/5 of the world's population, live in areas of physical scarcity. Puerto Rico. Bam. Boom. Right there. And 500 million people are approaching this situation, according to data from the United Nations. Another 1.6 billion people, or almost 1/4 of the world's population, face economic water shortage. In addition to reducing the company's water consumption by more than 60% over the past few years, even as it increased production, Nestle has been working with governments to find better ways to use water sustainably, he said. Of course, this is neglecting the fact that Nestle has been stealing water from all over the United States for decades. There's a documentary about it. Democracy Now! Has been reporting on it. Nestle is a corrupt company. It's stealing water from all over the world. The CEO is a soulless prick. And, I'll explain more. A risk. It's not an entirely altruistic step for the company, which had an around 12% share of the bottled water market globally in 2013, according to data on its website. By the way, this guy makes millions of dollars from natural disasters because in a natural disaster, the lack of electricity, all of this stuff, what are people drinking? Bottled water. This guy's making money. This is disaster capitalism. This is how they make money. For a food company like Nestle, this is a direct and indirect risk. The entire value chain is exposed to it, from the farmers, which have been producing our raw materials, up to the consumers, unquote. Brabeck Lemaith said in a presentation at the conference, "This is the reason we got involved in the water issue," unquote. That's bullcrap. It's not a water issue. The water issue is you stealing from communities and rebottling it and selling it to the same community. The issue is climate change and the rate of consumption that we have in affluent nations, and these affluent nations building up their militaries and bullying other nations and stealing their resources by murdering their children and committing mass genocide on a global scale. That's the issue. That's the water issue. Within the company, Nestle has created a quote-unquote shadow price for water for its operations locally to ensure it's given a value to make it psychologically more difficult to waste, said Brabeck Lemaith. Political concern. Charging for water can be a lightning rod for political criticism amid concerns that the poor will lose access to a necessity. Quote, "Water is a human right. I fully agree with that. Brabeck Lemaith said, noting that the around 30 liters a day needed for basic living should be provided without charge to those who can't afford it. But that amount is only accounts for around 1.5% of the fresh water destroyed daily," he said. He's more concerned about the other 98.5%. I don't think it's a human right to fill up a swimming pool. I don't think it's a human right to wash cars. I don't think it's a human right to water a golf course, he said. Growing investment gap. In addition to general concerns about wasteful use, Brabeck Lemaith noted that the water infrastructure has a growing investment gap, estimating the global minimum needed is around $770 billion a year, with the annual deficit running at around $250 billion. So if this guy thinks that water is a human right, then why is he still making a profit off of bottled water? Why isn't he just, with his billionaire money, why isn't he just giving water to those who need it for free? Crickets. And so I'm going to skip ahead. In California, which is suffering, so this is in 2015, through an around 3-year-long drought of historic proportions, the company has continued to produce bottled water. About 1.39 liters of water is needed to make 1 liter of bottled water, according to the industry trade group, the International Bottled Water Association. While the state has introduced some harsh restrictions, including fines of up to $500 for overwatering lawns, Nestle has largely sidestepped them by purchasing its water from a spring in Millard Canyon, California, some 80 miles east of Los Angeles, located on Morongo Indian Reservation. Because the reservation is considered a sovereign nation, it's not under any obligation to comply with state laws concerning the drought. Critics have also pointed to concerns over Nestle shipping the bottled water out of the parched state. We regularly engage with tribal water officials on the current drought situation and water resource management at Cabazon to ensure the long-term sustainability of this water supply, Nestle told CNBC via email. It said the bottling facility's water use is around 0.2% of total water demand in the neighboring Coachella Valley. So that article from CNBC was from 2015. So this is disclosed.tv, and I've seen this clip in a variety of publications. This is just the one I Googled and it came up. So I don't know much about the site, my apologies, but this is what this article says. Water is not a human right, claims CEO of Nestle, Peter Brabeck Lemaith. The current chairman and former CEO of Nestle is a man who does not practice what he has preached about water sustainability. And this came out September 2016. Nestle is a large conglomerate of food products in the world, which has peddled junk food in the Amazon, has some health and ethnic issues on its infant formula, has invested money to prevent the labeling of GMO-filled products, and has deployed a cyber army to monitor and control the internet in social media. Also, Nestle has proven record for destroying the environment, labor exploitation, and human rights violations. Bottom line for Nestle is to make a huge profit regardless of how this can be achieved. Peter Brabeck Lemaith has given talks on various occasions on human rights to water. In the 2005 documentary We Feed the World, in 2013 with The Guardian, and in 2015 with CNBC. Water is a scarcity, and one should be managed, controlled, and the price accordingly, else human will use it in an irresponsible way. In his opinion, it is extreme to say that human beings has the right to water. What this means is that everyone should have the basic need of water for drinking and sanitation, which we already established. This clip will be found in the show notes, but the elites are hypocrites, and they definitely don't believe that water is a human right, no matter what they say. Like Hillary Clinton said in her leaked emails, you have a private view and you have a public view. You have things that you share with the public, and then you have things that, what you believe and what you say to get elected. What you say, the things that your public relations office wants you to say to the public, and then what you really think and how you get profit, how you make a profit. Those are that's the distinctions in the elites. It's respectability politics. I'm gonna lie to your face and then murder your family. So I'm gonna read the subtitles because he's speaking in his mother tongue. So this is the former CEO of Nestle.
Mein Name ist Peter Brabeck. Ich komme aus Villach in Kärnten.
All right. He's describing where he's from. And for the past 7 years, I've been
Bin seit jetzt 7 Jahren
head of the Nestle Group,
der Nestle Gruppe, der größten,
the largest foodstuff corporation in the world,
Lebensmittelkonzerns der Welt,
with a turnover of around 90 billion Swiss francs,
Schweizer Franken,
or around $65 billion, and with around 275,000 employees working directly for us. So it's quite a large ship. We're the 27th largest company in the world. Today, people believe that everything that comes from nature is good. That represents a huge change because until recently, we always learned that nature could be pitiless. Man is now in the position of being able to provide some balance to nature. But in spite of this, we have something approaching a shibboleth that everything that comes from nature is good. Which, you know what, I think this is so the dumbest things that are coming out of this person's mouth, because we have dying bee populations and water is becoming more and more and more scarce. And here he is saying, oh, it used to be that humans were afraid of nature because, we used to live and had to experience the elements and survive, right? Natural selection and the like. But now, since we've killed off all the animals and we're polluting the earth, and he thinks that's control. Like, you understand what I'm saying? Like, the things he's saying are completely ludicrous and so far removed from the reality of what's actually happening in the world. We have mass extinctions like we've never seen before, and it's actually going to kill us. Like, we're actively committing suicide as a species right now because we're allowing people, the elites, to control all the natural resources. But continue, please. I need to hear what you have to say, Brabeck.
Beispiel ist Bio. Bio ist jetzt das Beste.
Oh, a good example is the organic movement. Organic is now best. But organic is not best. After 15 years of eating GM food products in the United States of America, not one single case of illness has occurred from eating them to date. Except the obesity crisis in the United States, except all of these other, the increase of cancer, more cases of high blood pressure, all of the heart disease. This is so far removed from the reality of what's actually happening. This man has no connection to being human. There's these white Europeans have no idea what's actually happening in the world. They're actually very unintelligent. Or they're maniacal. It's one or the other. So the next thing he says, and in spite of this, we're all so uneasy about it in Europe. That something might happen to us. It's hypocrisy more than anything else. No, what's hypocrisy is what's coming out of your mouth. But please continue. There's that lovely old Austrian folk song, quote, "The dear cattle need water, halara halar." If you remember, water is, of course, the most important raw material we have today in the world. It's a question of whether we should privatize the normal water supply for the population, and there are different opinions on the matter. The one opinion, which I think is extreme, is represented by the NGOs, who bang on about declaring water a public right. That means that as a human being, that you have a right to water. That's an extreme solution. The other view says that water is a foodstuff like any other, and like any other foodstuff, it should have a market value. Personally, I believe it's better to give a foodstuff a value, so that we're all aware that it has its price. And then that one should take specific measures for the part of the population that has no access to this water. And there are many different possibilities there. So you can watch the rest of the clip down below. But does that sound at all like he believes that water is a human right? Absolutely not. Because these people make money off of disaster capitalism. These people make money off of the scarcity of water. They make money off of scarcity. They can, right, the Rainbow grocery store increased the price of this gross, unfiltered, untreated water that has who knows what in it because of the scarcity. It was selling off the shelves because people believe in this organic raw water crap, right? Like, these people aren't stupid, they're idiots. And anyone who thinks that these people are intelligent are like, you guys have to really rethink, like, why do I think this way? Right? You may agree with me on certain things, but, like, let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's start making real change. And how we do that is by speaking out. Right? I'm a mother. I'm a worker. And this is my way of speaking out into the universe and creating an online community the best way I know how. And knowledge stacks, this is what I've got. This is my hobby, my lifeblood. This is what keeps me going, is speaking out to the universe. And, you know, I'll be real, sometimes I get really overwhelmed and I get flustered and I talk a lot about different subjects and I go on tangents, but I'm doing the best I can with the best resources I have. And that's all I have for this episode about water, you know, and the water crisis. And I really do believe that, you know, this is it, guys. Like, we have to start fighting back or we're not going to have clean water and the bee populations are going to continue to die out. And Puerto Ricans, we're dying. There's genocide happening against our people, just like the Native Americans, just like the African American population here in the United States. Just look at the prison population. Just look at police brutality. Just look at environmental justice movements, and look, we're suffering, guys, and simply just going on about your lives and pretending that it doesn't affect you is the most disgusting. You know, your silence is violence. Your silence is violence. And if you're not speaking out, then what are you doing? What are you doing for yourself? And that's it. That's it for episode 2. I hope you guys have a good week. I hope that you guys keep up the good fight. And episode 3, I'm gonna work on it on Monday and Tuesday. I have those 2 days off, and it's gonna be on Whitefish energy. So